After a long break from Shiurim, I hope you enjoyed not hearing my voice. So let's go back to the Siman that we're supposed to be learning now, Siman Kuf Tzadik Vov. Very Yesodis Siman, which discusses the dinim of bdikas in Shiva Nekiyim. Essentially, the last two topics in Hilchos Nida, which we're going to be finishing next few weeks, is Shiva Nekiyim, which is Kuf Tzadik Vav, and then some dinim connected to Tvil and Chatzitza, if we have time. One of the, in Sif Daled, Shulchan Aruch brings you a halacha, everybody knows this. Every day of the Shiva Nekiyim, a woman is supposed to do a bdika when she doesn't have sikhtara on the 5th day before Shkia, or whichever day the blood stops. If it's after the 5th day, it could be a 6th day, it could be a 7th day. And then afterwards, she has to do Shiva Nekiyim. She has to do Shiva Nekiyim, l'chatchila, one time in the morning, one time close to Bein Hashmashas. That's the halacha. Now, Shulchan Aruch tells you if she only did one bdika on the first day, or on the 7th day, or in the middle, it works. But if she didn't do any bdikas whatsoever in all the 7 days, she didn't have siktan, she didn't do any bdikas in all the 7 days, and then came the 8th day, and she did a bdika, that counts as day 1. And then the Shulchan Aruch says, V'yashayimrim, that she has to do a bdika on day 1 and on day 7, ve'ein lahokel. That is the halacha. Shulchan Aruch tells you, minimum is day 1 and day 7. Without that, you cannot be mekel. Where does this come from? There's a machlekes in Gemara, Rav and Rabbi Chanina. If a woman did a bdika, did a sikhtara, then did a bdika on day 1, and did a bdika on day 8, what's the halacha? What's the din? Rav says that Beinan Tchilas and Oisoifon, it's enough to have either in the beginning or in the end. So therefore, the fact that she did on day 1 is good, and she could go to mikveh on day 8. And according to Rabbi Chanina, you need Tchilas and V'seifon, which means you need Aleph and Zayin, and therefore, if she did only Aleph and Ches, she lost out and she has to start again. The Rosh, the Ravid, the Rambam, the Razah, which is a Balamor, not the Lubavitcher one, they all paskin like Rav, that 1 is enough. There's different little differences in how to understand what Rav says, but they all paskin like Rav. The Smag and Sefer HaTruma and the Ramban, they paskin like Rabbi Chanina that you need both first day and last day. And the Beis Yosef on the Tur says, Roi lahachmir be'isur shel kares. We should be machmir as isur shel kares, which is interesting that the Beis Yosef puts this idea of having to do bdikas as a chiyuv de'iraisa. It's also going to be important for what we're going to be discussing later on. To make it into a chiyuv de'iraisa, it becomes he calls a safek kares. These bdikas are de'iraisa. Now, what happens? So now, let's go to the people that hold like Rav, that being on Tchilas and Oy Seifon, 1 or just 1 is enough. Right? So when the Beis Yosef, when the Mechaber brings in a Shulchan Aruch, he says, Bot Koyim Aleph, Oyim Zayin, Oy Be'emtza. That means that he understands Rav's Shitta, that it's one bdika at any point during the Shiva Nekiyim. Doesn't have to be the first day, doesn't have to be the 7th day, doesn't have to be, it could be some point down at those ones. Not everybody agrees with that, even within the people that hold like Rav. For example, the Ravid holds that it does work. The Razah holds that it has to be either Tchilas and Seifon. If I'm being medayik in the lashon of Rav, so you have to be either Aleph or Zayin, not in the middle. The Tur went like the Ravid. He just quotes the lashon of the Ravid, which means that if it's 1 in the middle, it's all it works. And the Mechaber, like I said, he goes with the opinion that also the same like the Ravid, that If it's one, it doesn't make a difference which day it works. But l'maaseh, he's machman like the smag, which means that you need both aleph and zayin. I'll just go through some of the, before we go into what I want to discuss, there's a few important halachas. They're just points that have to be pointed out. Again, l'maaseh, the Shulchan Aruch tells you have to do one b'dika in the morning, one b'dika in the afternoon. What does b'boker mean? The b'boker, it's right away it means when she wakes up. Yeah, but she wakes up before, really it's supposed to be any time after the nets. B'dikas should be done, the b'dikas should be done anytime after the nets. But the evidence should be done, it could be done after alois. If nets is very late, she's not going to be able to do it. There are those which in the big shas atchak will consider the b'dika, if a b'dika is done during nighttime, as a b'dika for the following day. There is a machlekes whether nighttime is man b'dika or not. Does it count b'chlal as anything or not? It's important to have in mind that this idea that a night b'dika, there are those who are consider it as a b'dika. What will be negea to if a person forgets to do a b'dika, and it's a b'dika which is needed, which we will discuss later, and she did a b'dika, let's say she did a hasdei-tahara, and then she did a ma'ich, and she did a proper b'dika at night. So according to Mishas Chag Gadol, according to the people that, according to some of the opinions, that will be considered as a b'dika of Yom Aleph.
Only if it was after Shiur, right?
After it says. It was in the made of b'dika and it stays inside after it says, yeah.
Practically, it's only going to be for the first day. Practically, no one's going to b'dika by night. Except for...
No, saying is that's similar. No, what happens is if this counts for the following day.
No, yes. Only get a practically make a difference.
Practically will make a difference if somebody, if we say it, we need aleph zayin, yeah, and she did a b'dika day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then she's for whatever reason she's flying or whatever, she's going to lose on day 7, and she thought and she decided to make a b'dika on the night, or she forgot to do a b'dika on the day 6 and she did a b'dika, she remembered she didn't know she did a b'dika on the night, maybe it counts as day 7. Just important to know that there is certain opinions which hold that a night b'dika does count b'diavad. When you're dealing with b'diavad situations, then you just have to know all the shittas. I don't remember specifically who it is, but it is discussed that the night b'dika, the chatchila definitely, the chatchila even after Aleis HaShachar, after Aleis HaShachar also you shouldn't do it. What does Samuch lebein hashmoshes mean? Before Shkia. Lechatchila, when is it supposed to be? Mamish close to Shkia, as close as possible to Shkia. Shas atchak from mincha ketana and up. Shas atchak from mincha ketana and up. Lechatchila plaga mincha to Shkia. Shas atchak mincha ketana. Now, sometimes from taking into consideration it's important to teach the people that to do these b'dikas when you teach them. If somebody's going to be at work, or he's going to be at work, especially in the winter, when Shkia happens, when she's still at work, she's not going to be able to do it. Should do the b'dika any time after mincha ketana, not to forget the b'dika, or even earlier than that, to do the second b'dika if there is no other way around it. It's more important to do the b'dika in a way that's kosher b'shas atchak than to completely forget the b'dika. In the winter, you're in certain places where if a woman's going to go to work, she's going to leave the house before zricha. Not in New York is not so bad, but further north. You leave before zricha and come home after shkia. And she's going to have to remember she's at some point in the break to make a b'dika or something in the office, and then she can't be mechaven to exactly remember that this is going to have to happen. Oh, zricha, we're going to go right now do it. Oh, shkia, we're going to go right now do it. It's under stress and under a time of work. It's important to know this. Should be done. Teach these people it's better to do it, even if it's a little bit earlier than the time that you're supposed to, rather than doing it afterwards and you're not going to be able to get it right. Now, being the Mechaber says ve'ein lahakil on the shitta of Yom Aleph and Yom Zayin, So what happens if a woman forgets to do any b'dikas on day 1 of Shiva Nikiyim, and she starts on day 2? So day 2 will become day 1, and then she'll count and she'll go to mikvah on the 8th day, since they have sikhtara. Right? Because the second one will become the first, it will come Yom Aleph of Shiva Nikiyim, and then the 8th day will become Yom Zayin of Shiva Nikiyim. Same thing would be with if it's Yom Ches, if it's the 3rd day, she missed 2 days. Now there's one more nekuda that's important as Akdama also. There is a discussion what's considered, you have to count, the Torah says v'safra lo. She has to count 7 days. Now we know when it comes to Sfira Sa'imer, counting, you have to say it. Hayom yom echad va'imer. Yeah? Otherwise, if you didn't say it, you had it in mind, and this and that, shayla if it works. You lose out a bracha v'chol. The Shalosh says you have to actually say it with your mouth. It's mentioned in the Pesach Tshuva. Today is the first day of Shiva Nikiyim. The Behuda, the Radbaz hold that you don't need it to say it b'peh, but you have to be mechaven in your mind. Today is day 1, tomorrow is day 2, the next day is today's day 2, today's day 3. The Maram of Rotenburg says Yelchatchila should be done by saying it, and otherwise just have it in mind, or at least the minimum to know which day she's holding at. Yeah, that is just mentioning features in Pesach Tshuva. The reason I'm mentioning is because we're going to be discussing Asderi-Tahara and Tzemach Tzedek. This is very important. Some of the important points that are going to come up. Now, there is also in the Pesach Tshuva discusses about when she doesn't do b'dikas on all the days. For example, if she only did b'dika on the 1st day and on the 3rd day. Yeah, the Noida Behuda says she did a b'dika on the 1st day and on the 3rd day, 2 b'dikas. She didn't do 1st and 7th. And this is Sifkat Mevav in the Pesach Tshuva. She only did the 1st and 3rd. So she could be tevel on the 8th day, which is an interesting thing because the 8th is not the 7th, not to the 1st, and not to the 3rd, but Zizak the Noida Behuda. Bunch of people what's left said there's a question on the Behuda, Tzarichil and Haitach, and you could say that ultimately it's the Noida Behuda, the Mechaber says, Ve'en lahakol, which is mashma, you need to have Aleph and Zayin. So if she does an Aleph, and she does an Gimel, and then she didn't do on Zayin, then she should do on Tes, because Tes is the 7th day from Gimel. But not, she could do on Ches. Ches doesn't help anything. But if it would be Beis and Ches, it would help. Gimel and Tes would help. And then if you have also Gimel and Zayin, also there are some the same. For example, Dogel Mervava also holds that it's kosher, that it's Oilala B'diavad if she did the 3rd and the 7th. Now, what? It's what? Dogel Mervava. Yes. He says again. He writes in Dogel Mervava, if it's 3rd and 7th, it's Moel B'diavad. It looks like Noida Behuda holds that something with the 3rd, and the first is talking about the 1st and the 3rd. There is an idea that has to be a b'dika on the day that she goes to mikveh. So if she does 1st and 3rd, Yehuda says, okay, she'll do on the 8th and she'll go to mikveh. She does 3rd and 7th, she did on the 7th, she'll go to mikveh then. That means whichever, based on this Gemara, there's different shittas on understanding what the machlekes is. And we see what the Tzemach Tzedek holds. He understands the machlekes totally different, different than all these people. Now, what happens? This is all talking about when she did 2 b'dikas. Now, what happens? We go back to this one b'dika thing that we mentioned. This is really the majority of the Rishonim hold of the one b'dika, the paskin like Rav, not like Rabbi Chanina. That the one b'dika is enough. Either 1st or 7th or one in the middle according to Mechaber. And there are some which hold that's 1st or 7th. but can't be one in the middle. So same Pesach Tshuva also brings out over here that if it's on the 1st or the 7th, then in Kvarlonsa in Baila you could be Mekel, but if it's one of the middle ones, the Maisi can't be Mekel even if Lonsa in Baila. Now we're going to go into understanding Tzemach Tzedek. First introduction, Tzemach Tzedek goes based on the Sidrei-Tahara. You have a Sidrei-Tahara, and the Tzemach Tzedek doesn't match up to the Sidrei-Tahara, but he follows the Sidrei-Tahara discusses. Sidrei-Tahara opens, so Sifkot and Yutches mainly, opens by discussing, it's a long Sidrei-Tahara, you're going to get a chance to read it later if you want, that there is a discussion, do we need Spurim לפnienu, do we need to have this counting every day first, to have some sort of count of the Shiva Nakim, to keep track of the Shiva Nakim. First he says, the ones that hold that you need, according to the Beis Yosef, which he paskins that you need Aleph and Zayin, and he says, this is in the Shulchan Aruch, and in the Beis Yosef he says that it's Yesh Lahachmer B'Safek Koris. It's mashma that he holds that it is a Deiraisa. Akoponim is Safek Deiraisa. And that the keeping track of the 7 days of Spurim is also Midiraisa. She has to be the V'Sofra law that you have to have track of the 7 days is Midiraisa. According to those shittas, there's a holy each 1st and 7th. And according to the ones that hold that 1 is enough, whether 1st or 7th, Tchilas Noisayfon, it's not clear. So it's not clear. Do they need Spurim Lefanenu? Do we need is it Midiraisa? First of all, are these bdikas Midiraisa or not? Second of all, do we need Spurim Lefanenu? And he starts by bringing the Me'il Tzedakah. The Me'il Tzedakah says that even according to the ones which hold that 1 day is enough, she still has to count the days. Still has to count the days. V'Sofra law. Still has to count the days. And there's 2 reasons why he brings why she has to count the days. First of all, Pasuk says V'Sofra law, so you have to count it. Second of all, if she doesn't count the days, she's not going to pay attention, and maybe there's going to be some sort of she's going to feel some blood or something. She's not going to realize, she's not going to pay attention, and she could become tameh without knowing, and she'll just continue without doing any bdikas, and she'll go to mikveh. Really, she should not be going to mikveh because her Shiva Nakim got messed up. Now, so therefore, because you need this counting, the Me'il Tzedakah explains, because you need this counting, even according to the shittas which hold, even according to Rav, that even only 1 is enough, that is why in the Gemara, that is why if she does Hefsek Tahara and she does Yom Ches, she does not do Yom Aleph at all, because the Gemara talks about Bat Karish and Shmini. That's the Machlokes Rav and Rabbi Chanina. So remember, the Machlokes and Gemara is not do you need 1 and 7, or do you need 1 in the middle. The question in Gemara was, she did Hefsek Tahara day 1, day 8, what's the din? And from that, everybody learns out, as Rav says, day 1 and day 8 works. So obviously, because he holds Tchilas Neseifon, which means day 1 is enough, 1's enough. The question is, which 1's enough? And Rabbi Chanina holds, no, it's not good, and it's because he holds Tchilas and Seif, and need Aleph and Zayin. But if she only does Yom Ches, she does have Hefsek Tahara and she does only Yom Ches, even according to Rav, it doesn't also. What's the reason for it? So the Me'il Tzedakah explains, obviously, because you need Spurim Lefanenu. You need some form of counting of the Shiva Nakim. And if you didn't do a single bdika during the Shiva Nakim after the Hefsek Tahara, this counting never happened, because the counting is not only a counting in your mind. There has to be something to the counting. 1 bdika at least in the counting, and then the counting kicks in. But otherwise, the counting doesn't kick in. And based on that, the Me'il Tzedakah comes up with an interesting scenario. What happens if a woman saw Kesem on day 2? Or something along those lines, and therefore she has to restart her counting. She has to do Hefsek Tahara and restart the counting. And she didn't know, she didn't ask her Rav. She asked her friends, and her friends told her, oh, blood, wait 5 days, and then start. So on day 2, she started counting 5 days. Comes day 7, and she does a bdika. And then her husband went and asked the Rav, and the Rav says, what are you doing? What are you talking about? She only had to wait 1 day. So the Miltstocker says, even though she did be'etzim, she did first day, right? Then the second day she saw kesem, and she checked, there was no, she saw kesem, doesn't have to, she has to do a bdika, so she did a bdika, it was clean. And then she waited 5 days, and then she did another bdika, so technically you have Rishon and Shvi, so she should go to mikveh, right? She have Rishon and Shvi. The Miltstocker says no, it doesn't work. Why? Because she was completely Mesiach Das from the counting, and you need Spurim, Lefanainu, which means whichever way you're going to look at it, if you go based on the first that you need Aleph and Zayin, you definitely need Spurim Lefanainu, maybe even Midiraisa. And according to the second shit, the B'dikas, maybe not Midiraisa, still Spurim Lefanainu, you still need to have one B'dika during Shiva Nakim, and you still need to have some kind of Sfira. And the Miltstocker would say, if she was Mesiach completely from counting, she could become completely, that the Nakim doesn't count. That's one opinion in Asderi-Tahara. First thing, who does it apply? Second thing in Asderi-Tahara is, according to Rav, which holds that you need one bdika. When could that bdika happen? Do you have to have the first bdika on Yom Aleph? According to Rav, you don't need to, because it says Tchilas Noy Seifa. But let's say, according to the other Shittah, which is Halacha and Shulchan Aruch, you need Aleph and Zayin. Does the first day have to happen? Does Yom Aleph have to happen right after Hefsek Tahara? That's the topic you discuss. Does it have to happen right after Hefsek Tahara or not? Could it be 3 days later? Does the Hefsek Tahara have to be attached to the B'dik of Yom Aleph? And he explains, L'chayra, after Hefsek Tahara, this woman goes into the category of Cheskes Tahara. She goes to Tahara, she's mafsek with Tahara, she goes into the Chazak of Tahara. And therefore, L'chayra, if she's going to do it 3 days after the Tahara, the Hefsek Tahara will still be good. Right? Therefore, but she still has to keep the count in mind. For him, the main thing is the count. She will still have to keep the count in mind. And therefore, she would have to, this bdika still has to be within Shiva Nakim. It doesn't have to be the first day. According to the Svara of, according to Rav, she wouldn't have to be on the first day. But it still has to be within the time of Shiva Nakim, and she has to continue counting. And he goes back again to the same idea that was mentioned before. He goes and then he brings at length from every Rishonim. You can see it in the Asderi-Tahara. There's like 3 columns that he discusses it. All of them are just rayas from the Rishonim, from all the Rishonim, that need counting. And even according to Rav, you don't need Aleph and Zayin. Just well, you don't need both. You just need one. Still, she has to at least have in mind something that she's doing. She should count. Therefore, he takes the approach that even according to Rav, when you need one, really that one should be on day 1. Why? It kicks off the spurim. It kicks off the count. Otherwise, it doesn't kick off the count. So you need really on the first day. The same thing repeats later in Asderi-Tahara and Sivkot and Chav Beis. He also repeats the same idea, but it's very short. It's much shorter. But he also mentions that the majority of the Rishonim, which happened to hold like Rav, that you only need one. Still, that should be done on the first day. And then over there, he mentions another point in Sivkot that even those that hold that Aleph and Zayin, you need Aleph and Zayin, Rishon and Shvi, which is what the Beis Paskins La'aloche, and he says, Yesh L'Hachim B'Safek Shel Koros, he doesn't mean doesn't mean that the both Bdika Aleph and Zayin are Midaraisa. No, only one is Midaraisa. Even according to the B'Siyazim, only one is Midaraisa. Only the first one is Midaraisa. Bdika Yem Zayin is Midaraisa. Therefore, if she's in a situation and she could only do one Bdika, and we'll get to what those scenarios are later, she could only do one Bdika, she should do on Yem Aleph and not on Yem Zayin. Now back in Sifkat and Yudches, it's the Siddur goes the whole other topic at the end of his Sifkat, talking about Makris and Ksamim during Shiva Nakim, if you could count them or not, and being that the Tzemach Tzedek also discusses it. I will discuss it later. First I'm going to go into just a quick we'll go through the points of the Tzemach Tzedek and discuss the Siddur, what we see from it Lamaisa, and then go back to the Siddur for the end of the Siddur and the end of the Tzemach Tzedek on the same thing. Tzemach Tzedek's Shuvah is Siman Kuf Nun Hey, which is printed in your book in page 261. Here you have, just to give you, you have the first, it is 10 OCS. And the continuation and the conclusion of this tshuva is they only found it later, is in Shara Miluim Chelik Hey, Siman Chav Zayin, which is in your book, page 312. And over there you see it starts with Ois Yud Aleph on page 312. That is the end of this tshuva, the same tshuva of Kuf Nun Hey. Now, whatever is printed in Kuf Nun Hey is relevant to everything Siddur discussed up until he discusses the Makas and the Ksamim. What he has in Siman Chav Zayin is the end part, which is connected to the end part of the Siddur about Makas. We're going to do Kuf Nun Hey now, then go back to Siddur, then go to that. I am obviously not going to go through everything that Tzemach Tzedek says. Time constraints. Go through just certain important points that come up from the Tzemach Tzedek over here. The first, he starts by bringing the Siddur, which we said, the Siddur brings the name of the Mil Tzedakah, that even according to the Shita of Rav, that only one is enough, in Shiva Nakim, you still need Spurim לפנינו, and the two reasons are, A, because of the Pasuk, Safrala, and B, because Loitit Daito, she's not going to pay attention. If she's going to see something or feel something, she's not going to pay attention. Therefore, she still has to have in mind the Shiva Nakim. And therefore, if she doesn't have Sik Tahara and just day 8, even according to Rav, it wouldn't help. And the Tzemach Tzedek shortly explained why this Ein Nochen. Why he explains first of all, the majority of the Poskim hold like Rav. And they hold like, not only do they hold like Rav, they also hold that what understanding of Rav is that you need Soifon without Chilason will work, just on day 7, for example, which means that there was no Spurim לפנינו. So therefore, the first point that Tzemach Tzedek points out, the Yesod of the Siddur and the Mil Tzedakah, that you need Spurim לפנינו, is not the way he understands. It's not ma'akev. You have a shaila bazoi. Why doesn't Yom Ches help? If you have Hefsek Tara and Yom Ches, why doesn't Yom Ches help? So that he explains later on. So Tzedek is going to explain to you the svara, how he understands the Machlekes Rav and Rabbi Chanina, and then it's going to make sense. He says, still in all, you're not going to go against what it says in the Gemara, but we don't know exactly the reason of the Gemara. But the Lamaise, he says, it's even according to the Siddur Tahara, there is a svara that you don't need Spurim לפנינו, and therefore he says it is that's how he understands. Tzemach says the idea of Spurim לפנינו is not mandatory, definitely not according to Rav. Then Tzemach goes for about 5 oisius, and he discusses he discusses even, because then the Tahara says that, first he says that according to Rav, definitely you don't need Spurim Lefaneinu. Now, what the asderi-t'ahara says that according to Rabbi Chanina, you do need Spurim Lefaneinu, he says that's also not accurate. And he goes and explains it that first he goes into discusses that even some of brings more to Shonim that hold like Rav, that only one is enough. That not only that only one's enough, that one could be at the end of the Shiva Nakim, not in the beginning of the Shiva Nakim. And it would be enough, even midiraisa would definitely be enough tchilason, even though even though you don't have tchilason, and from the machmirim he only left with 2 or 3 of them. That's how the Tzemach Tzedek first goes through understanding who's on which team. Then he explains a very interesting, and this is in Sa'if Hey, that the idea of Spurim Lefaneinu, that essentially the asderi-t'ahara explained it different than what it really means. It doesn't mean actual counting. Everybody holds that Spurim Lefaneinu would mean, everybody understands that Spurim Lefaneinu means counting. You have to count, you have to have in mind. But he says that's not what it's talking about. Spurim Lefaneinu means that we have to have some form of cheskas tahara in the beginning and in the end, and we know the 7 days that she was in and she was tired. That's what Spurim mean. It doesn't mean that's counted. It means that there are these 7 days which are muchzak b'tahara. How are these 7 days muchzak b'tahara? Through having one tchila v'soif. But it doesn't mean that according to the person that holds tchila v'soif, you have to have Spurim Lefaneinu. You have to actually go and count them. And he understands that even according to asderi-t'ahara, the way he explains it, even according to him, we could say that you don't need Spurim Lefaneinu, even according to the shit of Yom Aleph and Yom Zayin. So now comes the question, we're back to the question, why, if you do we have so many people that hold like Rav, why if you do have asderi-t'ahara and then you come and you do on Yom Ches, why doesn't it work? The Chayre should work. According to the Shitta of Rav, that one's enough. Why is this Yom Ches doesn't work? If you say Tchilas Noi Soifon, and you say you don't need Spurim Lefaneinu, and we explained that if you have a bdike, we said that if you have, even if you start the Shiva Nakim, we explained if you start the Shiva Nakim a few days late, after the asderi-t'ahara, let's say according to the Aleph and Zayin, it still works. The Aleph starts 3 days later. According to Rav, who says Be'inan Soifon is enough, so let's put everything together. Asderi-t'ahara happened today. Then there was the 2-3 day gap, right? And then 7 days later, she did a bdika. One bdika is enough. That counts those 7 days. Why doesn't it work? Without Spurim Lefaneinu, it should still work. The asderi-t'ahara should not expire 7 days after when 7 days pass without doing any bdika. So he explains as follows. Really, the machlekes of Rav and Rabbi Chanina is not about do you need tchilason v'soifon or not. Machlekes of them is what is tchilason and soifon, and how many days could you go without a bdika. According to Rabbi Chanina, asderi-t'ahara does not count as tchilason, and you can't have more than a 5-day gap. 5 days without bdika. Tchilason has to be its own bdika, Yom Aleph. Soifon has to be its own bdika, Yom Zayin. And between the two, you can't have more than 5 empty days. That's Rabbi Chanina's shitta. According to Rav, 5 days is not 5 days, 6 days is also good. And the asderi-t'ahara counts as tchilason. So therefore, Yom Zayin would count as soifon. If you need soifon. And that's why, if she does asderi-t'ahara and then soifon is on day 7, it works. If she does day 8 and day 1, so up until now, how do we understand the Shitta of Rav? She does day 1 and day 8. It works. Why? Because we only look at day 1, only Tchilas and Seifon. It's not nothing to do with that. It's actually 6 days between day 1 and day 8. Just like the 6 days between Hefsek Tahara and day 7. So you have the 6 days between the one bdika that you count and the bdika you went to before mikvah. So it works. You also have Tchilas and Seifon, just not the Tchilas and Seifon the way everybody else understood it. So therefore, if she does a Hefsek Tahara and then she does day 8, it doesn't work. Because a Hefsek Tahara, you have more than 6 days between Hefsek Tahara and day 8. Even according to Rav, the one bdika has to be at some point, there's a Hefsek Tahara, and then at some point there's another bdika which will be counted towards. And then she goes to mikveh, the Seif will be the day she goes to mikveh. Lamer Zogan, okay, she says Tchilasan, the Seif will be the day she goes to mikveh. And it's a little bit mashal from the Tzemach Tzedek, that the day she goes to mikveh, even if she does one bdika, that day she would have to do a bdika anyways. It doesn't say it clearly, but based on the way he explains Rav, the day of going to mikveh would also need a bdika to do the oisoifon, right? And according to Rabbi Chanina, we said you need the first day to kickstart the bdikas. But it's not, but he said according to Rav, it's not the one bdika in the middle, lav dafka, the one bdika in the middle would work. So now he goes, he says, and what the Siddur Tahara then tells you, if she does a Hefsek Tahara, and then she starts her count, a few days later she does the bdika, and then she starts a Shiva Nekiyim, according to the Shittah of Aleph and Zayin, yeah? She starts the Aleph, the 3rd day became Aleph, and the 9th day, and the 10th day became Zayin. The 9th day became Zayin. So that works according to the Mechaber, because you have less than 5 days gap. You have the Hefsek Tahara. If you have less than 5 day gaps, it works. And according to Rav, as long as there's no 6 days past from the Hefsek Tahara and then you do a bdika, it also works. All right, so that's the machlekes of Rav and Rabbi Chanina. It's not about whether one is enough or not. It's how long past from the Hefsek Tahara. Hefsek Tahara might count as the first one, and the 8th one, and the 7th one will be, or any one in the middle would also work. Anyone in the middle would also work, as long as she goes to mikveh on the 7th day and there's no 6 day gap before she goes to mikveh. If she's a 6 day gap, it doesn't work. According to Rabbi Chanina, it's a 5 day gap, not a 6 day. 5 days means 5 empty days. 5 days with no bdikas whatsoever. Towards the end, the Tzemach Tzedek goes back and says, okay, now let's go back to what the Siddur Tahara says in the beginning, and over there, Siddur Tahara says that there's 2 reasons why. The 2 reasons why we need Spurim Lefanienu. One reason is because of the pasuk. Another reason is because of she's not going to pay attention. He says the second reason is not a good reason at all, and not a good reason at all. He doesn't like that reason, and he concludes with a very interesting lashon, if you want to call it. I didn't see it. It's in the end of Tes. Achim kol zeh, after the stilis and everything else, after discussing the whole topic for 9 long oisios, adayin yishleima de bonisi hayesoid, I created a good yesoid l'basraisa derav, the soifon afishin tchilas and tzarich sfira klal, according to the ones that hold, according to Rav, that holds that you need soifon, tchilason oi, soifon is you definitely don't need spurim lefanienu, not like the Middle Tzedakah tried to explain. And then he goes and says, and the Siddur Tahara brings a raya from the Rosh, and that you do need spurim lefanienu. You still need spurim lefanienu. The raya from the Rosh is the Rosh you can't bring a raya from, because the Rosh is talking about when there was no bdikas whatsoever. But if there was some bdika, that bdika, like we explained before, the Shiur Simach Tzedek is that the bdikas themselves is what creates the spurim. Not that we have to do an actual counting independent of the bdikas. Not that the bdikas are kosher if there was spurim. No, the bdikas create the spurim. You don't need spurim lefaninim. You don't have to actually count. The bdikas is what creates the Vesofra law is done via the bdikas. So if she does one bdika according to Rav, or she does two bdikas according to Rabbi Chanina, that creates the Vesofra law. If she doesn't do any bdikas whatsoever, that's when the Rosh would say that it doesn't work because there's no Sofra law. But if she does any bdika, does bdika day 1 and day 7, that works for the Sfira of Shivanikim. Right, now, back to the Asderi-Tahara. At the end of the Asderi-Tahara, he has a question, he puts a question, ends with Tzarechiyun, that the Asderi-Tahara starts, the end of the Asderi-Tahara, that being that you have, now that we establish, going to Asderi-Tahara, we'll go back to Asderi-Tahara, we'll go jump to Tzemach Tzedek soon, back to Asderi-Tahara. Okay, now that we establish that we need Spurim Lefneinu, so how could it be that certain Achronim were Mekel in the Makkah during Shiva Nekiyim? If you know that there's a Makkah and you're able to be Teil in a Makkah, how could you be Mekel? If the bdik is not fully clean. L'choira, the din of Makkah only applies when Mayonas Osum, when we're not expecting any blood, and therefore, since we see blood, we say she has a chazaka, and the blood that she saw is from a Makkah, we're Toile. But otherwise, if she does not have that chazaka, now that she is in after Hefsek Tara, but before she went to mikveh, she doesn't have the same chazaka, so how can you be Toile in the Makkah? More so, you need Spurim. How are you going to be able to have these counted days if one of them is not clean? You're right, it might not be the blood, but you have no way of determining what blood it is. When there's a makkah, we still don't know for sure if the blood is a makkah. We're toilet in a makkah. But over here, you want to be the spurim, you need the counting, you're not going to have that. They're not spurim, they're not nekiyim, not shiva nekiyim, they're not clean. Maybe there's not dam nida, but they're not clean. So how are you going to be able to count the shiva nekiyim? More so, you have a cheskas, you want to say you have a cheskas tahara from the hefsek tahara, you don't have a cheskas tahara from the hefsek tahara. What's the biggest proof? Says some you could have say, well, Corey, if you have aleph and zayin, right, and she doesn't do any bdikas in the middle, so we say, how could she go to mikveh? Because she has a cheskas tahara, right? It makes sense. She has a cheskas tahara from beginning to end, therefore she go to mikveh. He says, no, that's not the cheskas tahara. Because what happens if she sees on the third day blood? We don't go and say, oh, that blood is probably, find a way to be mat. If she has a proper re'iyah on the third day, she sees blood, not a makkah, nothing of that. We don't try and look for something to be toilet in and say it came from something else. No, we say, cheskas tahara out the window. Which means that she does not have a 7-day cheskas tahara after the hefsek tahara. There's no such a chazaka of tahara. So therefore, if she does not have a cheskas tahara, you can't be toilet in the makkah. If she sees blood in the makkah, you can't be toilet in the makkah. Definitely not in the bdika. And maybe if you want to be mekel, only if it's a kesem. Kesem, then you could be mekel if it's a makkah. But if it's a bdika, there's a makkah, you cannot be mekel.
After 7 days,
after what?
After 7 days.
Yeah. Yeah, but here, right. So then, so after the first 3 days of Shiva Nekiyim, you still maybe within the border of Mayona Pasuach, right? But then afterwards, maybe Mayona Sosum, but she doesn't have a Cheskas Tahara. The Cheskas Tahara is not established. That's what he says. He says you can't use the Cheskas Tahara to say that it says that the whole Makkah is based on Cheskas Tahara, and therefore we don't might see Yishim Cheskaso. But since you don't have the Cheskas Tahara, maybe you don't have a Cheskas Tum, it's Mayana Pasach, definitely a problem.
What makes her Cheskas Tahara?
What
gives her a Cheskas
the 7 full days of being clean. That's what's mashma from the Siddur-Tahara, that the Cheskas Tahara of a woman comes after the 7 days of being of Shiur Nakiyim, not from a Hefsek Tahara. That's what it seems like from him. He says, therefore, he has a question on the people that are Mekel and Amaka. And he lives in Tzarech Chiyun.
Hamzah says you only need 1 day. Hamzah says you only need 1 day.
For Spurim, yeah. The Siddur-Tahara is the one that creates the whole, Spurim is a package. The Tzemach Tzedek seems to be going with the Siddur-Tahara, just explaining every point of Siddur. Yeah, that's what I explained. Tzemach Tzedek is Mekel. What's what for what? Yeah, that's what we're going to do right now. That's the next person. Now, so this is the Siddur ends in the Tzarech Chiyun, that you have you can't rely on the Makkah when it comes to he doesn't understand how they could be Mekel even in a Kesem and in B'dikas. But Paul looks like he's Mekel in a Kesem, but not in B'dikas when it comes to Makkah, but he still stays in Tzarech Chiyun. On that, you have a Tzemach Tzedek. So Tzemach Tzedek also discusses that part, which is on page 312. It's discussed in other places in Tzemach Tzedek also. I'm just using this because this is it's a hemshech of the same tshuva. And over here it's in page 312. It's a short thing that Tzemach Tzedek says. Everything we discussed until now is regarding Sforim Lefaniנו, that she doesn't need to have in mind the 7 days. But Mashikosav Siddur-Tahara, we have another topic of Siddur-Tahara discussed about, which is how can you be toiling in Makkah in Shiur Nakiyim? L'chayra, she's in a Cheskas Tumah. And therefore, how you could be toiling in Makkah? That is the Yesod of Siddur-Tahara. And he explains that it's not so. Really, the ones that, according to Rav, he holds that you don't need Chila v'Saif. You only need 1. Definitely, once there's a Hefsek Tahara, she's in a Cheskas Tahara. And that's why, if she does a bdika on day 1, she goes to mikveh 6 days later. We obviously say that there was a Cheskas Tahara those 6 days. She's not doing another bdika to check. If she does on the 7th day and doesn't do on the 1st day, according to Rav, also not a problem. The Cheskas, she has a Cheskas Tahara. That bdika, l'chayra, is only for the idea of to have this counting, this spurim, this 1 day of counting that creates the counting of all the 7 days. Otherwise, you don't need it. The Cheskas Tahara is there. So therefore, according to Rav, definitely is a Cheskas Tahara, and you definitely could be toilet in the Makkah, even a bdika. Yeah, so that's what it seems like. However, even according to Rav, let's go back to what we discussed before. We can't clearly say that there's a Cheskas Tahara that's non-waivable over here. Why? Because if you look at what Rav said in the Gemara, Rav didn't say she could go to mikveh if she only does 1 bdika on day 1. It was talking about she did day 1 and day 8. And that's when there was a Cheskas Tahara. If she only did on day 1, she didn't do on day 8, and she went to mikveh on day 8, it wouldn't work. So how can you be so clear there's a Cheskas Tahara if she does for all the 7 days? But if she only did 1 of the Shiur Nakiyim, maybe we cannot be toilet in the Makkah. So he says, but if she does a bdika aleph and zayin, then you could be toilet in the Makkah. Why? Because according to bullshit, you have a Cheskas Tahara. According to Rav, you definitely have a Cheskas Tahara. The only difference between beginning and end is that Rav was Mekel, that you could have a 6-day gap rather than a 5-day gap. But there's still, the Cheskas Tahara will apply if she has day 1 and day 7. But you could be Mekel. If there are bdikas in the beginning and the end, you could be Mekel in the Makkah in the Shiur Nakiyim. And then he says, and what the Chacham Tzvi and the Siddur-Tahara want to differentiate between a Kesem where they're more Mekel and bdikas where they're more Machmir, that's not so. Rather, if there are bdika aleph and zayin, you could be toilet and anything you could be toilet, including a Makkah. You don't have to be Machmir. If there are bdikas, you don't have to be Machmir on these. Even if it's a bdika, if you know there's a Makkah, you could be toilet in a Makkah, you toilet in a Makkah, and does not ruin the sfurim that we don't really need. Right, so now, if you read the Tzemach Tzedek simply, it seems like to be toilet in a Makkah, for the Tzemach Tzedek, you have to have aleph and zayin. That's what's mashma from here. It seems like it, right? That if she sees, if she did a bdika in the middle of the Shiva Nakim and there's a makkah, and she saw blood and we're toilet in the makkah, then this would, if she does a bdika on day 7 and it's clean, then you could be toilet in it. But stam, if she only does a bdika on day 1, and then she does a bdika and she sees a makkah, and then she doesn't do any other bdikas afterwards, maybe you can't be toilet in it. It's not clear if you could be toilet in such a scenario or not. There is another place where it's mashma, I don't remember right now, it's mashma machzedek at Bechlal, you could be toilet in makkahs in Shiva Nakim without this. However, Tzemach Tzedek does not discuss chiyuv bdika.
I don't know if it's the same true, but someone said it does say somewhere that a lady who can do bdikas for whatever reason, day aleph is enough.
Day aleph is enough, yeah.
Plus, if she could, to do a kinuah.
Yeah, that's a different shuvah, yeah. No, it's not here, somewhere else. Right, but so it is over here, is in a derech pilpul.
This is not during the first 3 days, or is it also?
Also in the first 3 days. Yeah. So it seems like, yeah. So now, but if they're discussing a chiyuv bdika, if a woman does have all these p'tsoim and everything else, and she can't do a bdika, she can't do bdikas and be'oimek without becoming pasul. So you have from the Tzemach Tzedek, like it was mentioned before, you have from the Tzemach Tzedek, you do day 1, and afterwards you do a kinuach, rather than doing a full bdika. And once you get one clean bdika is enough. And the same idea you also have in the Aruch HaShulchan. If you look in the Aruch HaShulchan, also discusses the same thing, that if a woman has a lot of tzoim, she only does one is enough. He doesn't say day 1 like it's a Tzedek, doesn't do the beginning of the day 1. There are those that understand from the Tzemach Tzedek, they connect the 2 tshuvas together, and they say that being that the Tzemach Tzedek over here goes to you don't need the whole spurim לפנינו, and takes apart the whole idea of the asderi-t'hara that you don't need the spurim לפנינו. B'meila, the one b'dika doesn't have to be in the beginning. They connect the 2 tshuvas of Tzemach Tzedek together, and they say, Tzemach Tzedek in a certain scenario, even if it's only one b'dika, then Shiur Nakim will still be fine if it's not the first day. I happen to think it's not so, that it is.
That's clearly doesn't.
Tzemach Tzedek, understanding Tzemach Tzedek.
Not sometimes. He himself holds it one day, it should keep doesn't make a difference which day.
It doesn't make a difference which day it is. From Tzemach Tzedek, you could understand that doesn't make, from this true, you could understand it doesn't make a difference which day. From another place, it still seems like it has to be dafka day 1, in such a scenario. The Aruch HaShulchan uses that in a scenario when there's a lot of makas, you could rely on one bdika, you could rely on the shitta of Rav, of one bdika is enough. Right? Because in Tzemach Tzedek, what the discussion over here is whether it could be telling the makkah, not about what the chiyuv bdika is. So if there's a certain scenario when it's clear that this woman has a lot of makas, and if she's going to do bdikas, she's for sure not going to be able to get a clean half-stick. Then, if she only does one, sometimes you could be mekel. Now, why is it important to know this? You can't be mekel, even the side of Tzemach Tzedek, inside the Chavas Das, inside the asderi-t'hara, the mashmal asderi-t'hara a little bit, and the Aruch HaShulchan, all discuss when there is makas, serious makas. Not that the woman forgot. If a woman forgot to do bdikas, and you're dealing with regular, according to Shulchan Aruch, you have to do bdika Yom Aleph and Yom Zayin. So if a woman did a bdika on day 1, and then she forgot and didn't do any bdika till Bechlal, and she gets already missed. So sometimes you should be machar, start again. You can't be mekel based on that. If a woman did day 1 and day 2, and then she got sick or whatever it is, and she didn't do any bdikas, and now it's day 7, and she didn't do bdika on day 7, let her go to mikvah on day 8, because day 2 will become day 1, and day 8 will become day 7. Even if even if she forgot on day 7, only the whole day 7, she didn't do any bdika on day 7, some will say push it off. I tell people push it off to day 8, and then go on day 8. So you at least have a bdika on the last day of Shiva Nekim, which is that's the mashmos lachatchila of the mechaber, the ein lahakol. It's day 1 and day 7. Day 1 and day 7 means that the day of going to mikveh there has to be a bdika. So even if a woman has to push off bdika, when's the negev? A woman has to push off bdika, she does Shiva Nekim. Right, and then she has to push off the bdika, she has to push off the tevilah because for whatever reason she's not in a place where she could, there's no mikveh, the mikveh shut down or whatever it is, she was in, flight got delayed, v'chulu v'chulu. So then she'll go to mikveh the next day or 2 days later, she'll do a bdika that day. As long as there's less than 5-day gap, and you can still, you always, as long as you could extend it, she has to make sure that she never passes that amount of time without it. So now, if you do have a situation where a woman cannot do b'dikas every day, and you're going to have to paskin to her, so you're going to think about it, you're going to look from Shulchan Aruch and say, oh, day 1 and day 7, right? That's the minimum. Don't say day 1 and day 7. They say day 1, day 4, and day 7, or day 3 and day 7. Because in case she misses day 7, and she calls you all panicked from the mikveh, I forgot, I didn't do b'dikas, and she only did day 1, you have a problem. Only when you have serious markers, maybe you could rely on the Aruch HaShulchan. And even going to Tzemach Tzedek, another place, you need some kinuach in the middle, because kinuach counts like a b'dika. But otherwise, if it's only day 1, how could you rely on Rav, even though the majority of the poskim do hold like Rav up until the Shulchan Aruch? Shulchan Aruch says, Vein lahakol. So therefore, it's highly recommended you do another b'dika some point in the middle. And I did see there were in certain, if you're dealing with the Chabad house, there were certain scenarios where if the b'dika forgot day 1 and there was the moich dochop was done as a b'dika in the state till after tzes, and there was a shasat chagodol that the mikveh is only in a certain location, or that they were going out of town and there's no other way to access the mikveh, if it would get pushed off for a long time, then they would rely on it as, on the moich, not on the asderi-t'hara, as the b'dika of Yom Aleph. But still should do a b'dika on Yom Zayin. Why would the moich be the b'dika of Yom Aleph? Because only if it was done b'chayim b'izdakim and it was done after, and it's remained till after tzes.
Even though during the nighttime?
I said those at the beginning of the shiur, that there are people that hold that a nighttime b'dika, b'shas chag gadol, works, even though the chatchila it doesn't. Yeah. And with this, conclude this topic. Stop the recording.